You are listening to The Evidence Locker. Our cases have been researched using open source and archive materials. It deals with true crimes and real people. Each episode is produced with the utmost respect to the victims, their families, and loved ones. When father of two, 47-year-old Kevin Lee, did not come home for dinner on Good Friday, March 29, 2013, his wife Christina immediately sensed that he was in trouble. They had been married for 17 years and no one knew him better than his wife. Kevin was a creature of habit, and every night he would come home, have his dinner, watch television with his wife and children. But on that Friday night, Kevin did not show up, and when Christina tried to call him, his phone was off. This was highly unusual, as Kevin was the owner and landlord of a couple of properties, which basically meant that he was on call 24/7 in case any one of his tenants needed him. His phone was never off. Frantic to find her husband, Christina Lee asked Kevin's business partner to help her by supplying a list of addresses of the properties Kevin was renting out and physically went around to knock on every door looking for him. But nobody had seen him. His wife knew that something tragic had happened. It was completely out of character for Kevin to skip a family dinner, especially at Easter, without letting her know. And at 10:40 p.m., she went to the police and reported him missing. What she didn't know at this time is that Kevin's burnt-out light blue Ford Mondeo had been found on a farm road in nearby Yaxley, about 2 hours prior. Passers-by had called 999 and reported the burning automobile. Fire crews arrived within minutes to extinguish the fire. They knew that this was no accident. The fire had been deliberately lit. The damage was extensive and ruined the entire car. In searching the car and the surrounding area, there was not one sign of a body. Where was Kevin Lee? Kevin Lee owned a business called Quick Let, letting homes to homeless and vulnerable people. Most of his properties were in the Orton Goldhay area in Peterborough, England. It was mostly former council housing which he had renovated himself with his experience as a builder. Typically, people who were looking to the council for help with accommodation were referred to Kevin's business, Quick Let. Kevin was a family man who loved watching Formula One racing. He even named his son Dino after a Ferrari race car. As Dino grew up, Kevin took him karting most weekends, and Dino was very good at it. In fact, he made it all the way to the British Karting Championship. Kevin was positive and kind and wanted to give people a chance in life. He liked helping his tenants out. Sometimes he wouldn't insist on a deposit and was always available to do repairs and maintenance to his properties. When a woman with a prison record came to Kevin, looking for a place to stay, he found her a spot in a shared apartment with a common kitchen and bathroom. The woman was 31-year-old Joanne Dennehy. Dennehy was released from prison after serving 14 weeks for theft. But the story she told to Kevin Lee was that she had been in prison for 8 years. She said she was sent to prison because she had killed her father after he had raped her. She also confided in him that she had killed 2 other people in a house fire and ran 2 other people over in a car, but she was never suspected for the other murders. Kevin was able to look past Dennehy's sordid past. He wanted to help her. In fact, before long, he developed romantic feelings for her. He became quite infatuated. He let her stay rent-free in his bedsits and bought her gifts. In return, Dennehy went around to Kevin's other tenants and threatened them if they hadn't paid rent. She was somewhat of a debt collector for Kevin, who was usually mild-mannered and kind to his tenants. Kevin's wife noticed that his behavior had changed and felt uneasy about his friendship with Dennehy. On March 20th, 2013, he confessed to her that he was, in fact, having an affair with Dennehy. Christina was devastated, but The couple decided to try and work things out. When Kevin didn't come home that night, despite their problems, Christina was convinced her husband was in trouble. Kevin had told her days before that Dennehy had said she wanted to kill again. Alarm bells began ringing for Christina. Something wasn't right, and she was certain Joanne Dennehy had something to do with Kevin's absence. Together with police, Christina went around to Kevin's properties yet again. She noticed that one of the bedsits she had been to earlier had its light on. Earlier, it was off. She gave police permission to enter the property, which they did. Once inside, the strong smell of bleach was undeniable. Apart from blood evidence, both present on the floor and sofa, there was no signs of a violent struggle. Police cordoned off the area and treated the bedsit as a crime scene. For the moment, there was nothing much police could do. With no trace of Kevin at the car wreck, there was still the very slight chance that he could be alive. Christina went home, waiting anxiously for more news until the morning when she would go out and look for Kevin again. On Saturday morning, March 30th, 2013, Kevin Lee's body was found in a ditch off of the motorway at Newborough by a man walking his dog. Kevin was wearing ladies' clothing, a black sequin dress, and was deliberately left in a humiliating position, face down with his buttocks exposed. Terry Palmer, the 68-year-old man who found Kevin's body, said, "I never would have found it if it weren't for my dog. You couldn't see the body from the road. At first I thought it was a dummy. It was lying face down in the dike. But then I noticed there was blood on the man's sleeves and I decided to call police straight away. The location is very isolated. Only dog walkers like myself ever come up here." It was very hard for police to find witnesses or monitor which vehicles were passing by in the area. Kevin was left in the middle of a field, next to a motorway. There were no CCTVs or buildings nearby. The discovery of Kevin Lee's body sparked an investigation and detectives launched Operation Darcy. Armed with information about Joanne Dennehy provided by newly widowed Christina Lee, police followed up on this woman who had reportedly said she had killed before and that she wanted to kill again. Joanne Christina Dennehy was born in St. Albans, Herefordshire, in 1982. She had quite an ordinary childhood. Her mother Kathleen worked in a supermarket and her father Kevin worked as a security officer. She had a younger sister, Maria, and they had a happy and wholesome upbringing. Joanne's mom describes her as a loving and sensitive child with good reports and polite manner. She played netball for the school and loved music. Joanne had high aspirations and wanted to become a lawyer, a career choice that would have made her parents very proud. But once she hit her teens, trouble started. She skipped school often and lied to her parents. When she was 14 years old, she met a man called John Traynor in a park while he was out walking his dog. She approached me. She had a thing for dogs, and it just went from there. She'd fallen out with her parents, and she was a bit of a free spirit, but I liked her. In fact, I loved her. The two were taken with each other and started dating, despite the 6-year age gap between them. John remembers that when he met Joanne, she was already out of control, burning books, ditching school, drinking, and doing drugs. Her parents pleaded with her to end her relationship with John and to finish school, but she wouldn't have any of it. At the age of 15, Dennehy dropped out of school for good and left her family home. Neither Dennehy's nor John Traynor's parents would let them live with them, as they were opposed to this relationship. Dennehy's parents kept their hopes up that the relationship would not last and that their daughter would come back home. But she never did. In 1997, Dennehy and John lived rough for a year. Their home was a tent. Sometimes they would sleep at bus stations. John knew she could handle herself. She could bring a grown man to tears only by using her sharp tongue. John was never a drinker, but he did smoke some weed. By his own admission, he was no angel, but he had things under control. Just not his fiery girlfriend. When Dennehy drank, it would bring about a drastic change in her behavior. She was not the same person, and that brought about many arguments. In 1999, the couple settled in Cambridgeshire, and things were looking up. At the age of 17, Dennehy was pregnant with her first child and she stopped drinking. John enjoyed this time and he saw a nicer side of his girlfriend. But once their daughter was born, Dennehy did not want to have anything to do with her. Alcohol binges became a regular thing and she was not involved with the baby at all. When the baby was 2 years old, they rented a council home. Neither of them worked and Dennehy spent her benefit money on alcohol and drugs. John was furious and tried his best to keep the family together, but there was no motherly kindness or care coming from Joanne Dennehy. A neighbor remembers. Jo was forever drunken on drugs, even when she was out walking with her daughter. On one occasion, she shaved the little girl's head until she was completely bald. She told us it was because she had nits, but nobody was convinced. Another neighbor said she saw an argument in the back garden which ended with Dennehy picking up a cricket bat and battering John as he desperately tried to shield himself. When John found out about Dennehy's affair with a cocaine addict neighbor, he took their daughter and moved away to King's Lynn in Norfolk. But she tracked him down and promised to rein in the drinking, so John took her back. For a short while, things were okay. Dennehy even found a job working as a day laborer on vegetable farms in the area. Then her drinking escalated again. She stopped working for cash and agreed to be paid in whiskey and vodka. When she came home from work, she would be drunk and aggressive. Once, she almost pushed her 3-year-old daughter down the stairs in a drunken rage. When Dennehy didn't come home after work one night, John was quietly relieved. She disappeared for 1.5 years and John was left to raise his daughter alone. And this time he had no contact with her. But he had heard rumors that she was working as a prostitute to bankroll her addictions. When she returned, she told John that she had spent time in prison and in a psychiatric unit. He hoped that this time things would be different and gave her another chance. They moved to Wisbeck in Cambridgeshire in 2003, where Dennehy managed to keep her drinking under control for the next 3 years. In this time, the couple's second daughter was born. After the birth, the old pattern repeated itself. Dennehy's drinking took precedence over everything else in her life. She was drinking up to 2 liters of vodka a day, not counting the strong lager she served herself for breakfast. In her drunken tirades, she would often commit self-harm by cutting herself with razor blades on her arms, her neck, and her stomach. By 2009, living with Joanne Dennehy was pure torture. John was scared for their kids as their mother's violent behavior only increased. One night she arrived home, severely drunk, when she pulled out a 6-inch dagger from inside her black knee-length boot and said that she wished she could kill someone. John kept a close eye on her and went to his daughters to protect them. Joanne was so drunk she went to sit on the floor and pegged the knife into the floor where it stayed. The next day, when John took his eldest daughter to school, Joanne wasn't far behind. She had a carry bag full of booze and made a huge scene at the school gates. That afternoon, John fetched his daughter from school, packed only bare essentials, and abandoned their home. He knew he had to take his daughters away, somewhere where Joanne Dennehy would never find them again. Dennehy simply cut her losses and moved to the nearby Peterborough. Drinking was part of her existence and she prostituted herself to earn money to spend on alcohol and drugs. Her life was spiraling out of control as violent behavior escalated. She kept landing herself in trouble with law enforcement. In 2012, she received a 12-month community service sentence for assault and owning a dangerous dog. And she was in prison for theft for 14 weeks. When she was released from prison, the then 29-year-old Dennehy was admitted to hospital for mandated psychiatric treatment. There was concern regarding her history of self-harm, and she claimed to suffer from depression. She was diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder and a series of psychopathic and other antisocial disorders. She did not receive any counseling or treatment and was released soon after being diagnosed. It's important to note that Dennehy was never diagnosed with any mental illness. Her disorders were all conditions and she showed no remorse for any of her actions. She did whatever she wanted to do and was not concerned about any of the consequences. To top it all off, she was a world-class pathological liar. She could fool anyone. Sounding literate and educated in one instance, but turn on her rough side for the next. And it's this skill that she used when she met Kevin Lee, when she told him that she killed her father because he had raped her. Of course, none of this was true. Joanne Dennehy was never interfered with as a child, especially not by her father. Once she was settled, intimidating Kevin's tenants in exchange for living rent-free, she was pretty much as happy as she would ever be. She loved using her dangerous magnetism to invoke fear into people, and Kevin Lee once mentioned that she reminded him of Uma Thurman in Kill Bill. And this time, Dennehy was often seen with her friend Gary Stretch. Standing 7 foot 3 inches tall, he had changed his name from Gary Richards. The 47-year-old blamed his height as the main contributing factor in him being a bad burglar. He was identified and reported after a burglary he had committed not far from his home and jailed for 2 years. In jail, he was accused of playing a part in killing a fellow inmate at HMP Peterborough. Brian Haynes died of heart failure after a physical attack. Stretch's part was to be lookout while others launched this attack. In the end, no charges were laid against Stretch. Out of prison and on parole, Dennehy arranged for him to live in one of Kevin's properties at Rolleston Garth. She was a master manipulator, and Stretch was her all-too-willing follower. He knew she went around with other men, but he was only too happy to have her in his life, even if it only made him her henchman. Dennehy lived with 2 other men, a retired Navy veteran called John Chapman and petty thief Leslie Layton. Kevin had already handed eviction notices to both men, and Dennehy's presence inside the bedsit was supposed to intimidate them enough so that they would leave. It wasn't long before Dennehy had the 36-year-old Leslie Layton under her spell. He fell hook, line, and sinker for her charms. However, their other roommate was a different story. Dennehy could not stand John Chapman, and neighbors were aware of the fact that he was petrified of her. He called her a mad woman after she threatened to get him out of the house by any means. Friends of John Chapman's couldn't understand where the animosity towards him came from. He was an alcoholic, but known as a friendly drunk. He liked to drink and then talk about his time in the Navy. Other than that, he minded his own business and no one had anything bad to say about him. Dennehy literally made her career out of scaring people. Together with her friend, Gary Stretch, they would go around to Kevin Lee's tenants, shake them up if they didn't pay rent, and intimidate them enough to leave once they've received eviction notices. The bedsit Stretch was living in was in the process of being cleaned up and painted, a job Kevin would pay him and Dennehy to do. Dennehy floated between properties, and where she slept probably depended on how much she had to drink or who she was sleeping with. In this time, she met a 31-year-old Polish migrant called Łukasz Slabozewski. Łukasz had left his hometown of Nowy Sól on the west of Poland in 2005 and moved to Peterborough. He worked locally in a DHL warehouse. He was a known drug user and did not have a regular address. Police believed that he had met Joanne Dennehy in this environment of soup kitchens and homeless shelters. He quickly became infatuated with Dennehy and began sending her text messages. He was under the impression that the feeling was mutual. He told his friends he had found an English girlfriend. On his last day, Slabozewski was caught on CCTV camera withdrawing money before going to Kevin Lee's apartment in Rolleston Garth to meet Dennehy. She lured him there with the promise of sex, and he was never seen alive again. He was blindfolded and then stabbed in the chest inside the home. Forensic evidence showed that he was probably Dennehy's first victim. His attack started in the kitchen. Blood evidence in the living room bears evidence to a prolonged and vicious attack with a deep stab wound right into his heart. The attack happened while Gary Stretch was upstairs sleeping. When he came downstairs and saw Łukasz, Dennehy instructed him to help her dispose of the body. They placed Łukasz's body in a green wheelie bin at the property. Stretch later confessed that he did not alert law enforcement. He was afraid they would arrest him for the murder. Dennehy was proud of her accomplishment. She had finally committed her first murder. So callous was she that she took a 14-year-old girl out to the bin and showed her Łukasz's decaying body. Then she informed Kevin that a man had died at one of his properties and that she needed money for a car so she could go dispose of the body. He gave her the money. And 2 days after Lukasz's murder, Dennehy and Stretch went out and bought a Vauxhall Astra together, as Stretch was the only one with a driver's license. Stretch insisted that the car had to be registered in Dennehy's name. Without her knowledge, he insured the car, which he referred to as the hearse, in the company name Undertaker and Company. A sick joke considering why they bought the car in the first place. On the day they bought the car, CCTV cameras recorded the green Vauxhall driving around late at night. Lukasz Slabozewski's body was in the trunk, and they were looking for a good spot to dump it. Eventually, they decided on Thorny Dyke, close to where Stretch had lived years before. It was remote with a few, if any, pedestrians around. Chances of the body being discovered were slim. 10 days later, Dennehy had the taste for blood again and kicked off Easter weekend with the murder of John Chapman. The next victim had to be Kevin Lee, as he was becoming a liability. Not only did he confess his affair with Dennehy to his wife, but he also knew about the plan to dispose of Lukasz's body. 10 days later, Kevin would be dead too. On Good Friday, Dennehy received an Easter card from Kevin. Later that day, she called him and arranged to meet him at his property in Rollestone Garth, the same property where she killed Lukasz Slabozewski. Before Kevin went to meet her, he spoke with a friend saying that Dennehy told him that she had wanted to dress him up and rape him. Against his better judgment, Kevin decided to go. He stopped off at the music store HMV around 2 p.m. and bought her a gift. And this was the last time anyone ever saw Kevin Lee alive again. One can only speculate as to what exactly happened when Kevin arrived at the property in Rolleston Garth. He most likely willingly changed into the sequin dress given to him by Dennehy, complying to her sexual foreplay demands. But this tryst did not end the way that Kevin would have ever imagined. Dennehy's attack on him was sudden and unexpected. She pounced, stabbing him 5 times in the chest. The wounds penetrated both his lungs and his heart. It was the evening of Easter Friday, and Joanne Dennehy had killed 2 men. The body of John Chapman was still at the bedsit he shared with Dennehy and Leslie Layton in Orton Golday. The body of her landlord Kevin Lee was at a property he owned at Rolleston Garth. She needed to dispose of both these bodies. Fortunately for her, she could count on Gary Stretch and Leslie Layton to help her out. Layton, who claimed he was operating under duress, was given the keys to Kevin Lee's Ford Mondeo and drove to a pre-selected location, followed by Dennehy and Stretch in the Vauxhall Astra. CCTV footage shows Kevin's blue Mondeo pull up at a Shell service station just before 9 p.m. Layton jumps out and fills a canister with fuel. The tall and recognizable Stretch went inside and paid, while Dennehy remained in the car and is actually never seen on the footage. From there, it is fair to assume that the threesome drove to Yaxley, where they doused Kevin's Mondeo in fuel and set it ablaze. Passers-by reported a burning car shortly after 9 p.m. It is not clear in which car Kevin's body was at this point, presumably in the boot of his own car before Dennehy, Stretch, and Layton started the fire. Kevin's autopsy revealed that he had been covered with fuel or accelerant, but never burnt. Perhaps a change of plan or difference in opinion caused them to move him to Dennehy's car. Kevin's body was dumped about 10 miles or 16 kilometers from his burnt-out car in Newborough. Dennehy and Stretch dumped his body, posing it, while Layton remained in the car. Then the gruesome threesome returned to the bedsit in Orton Goldhay, collected the body of John Chapman, carried him down the stairs from the top floor, and loaded him into the boot of Dennehy's Vauxhall. They drove the 12 miles or 19 kilometers to Thorny Dyke, where they left Lukasz Slabozewski's body and dumped John Chapman's body right next to him. Leslie Layton went to sleep at the apartment where Kevin Lee was murdered earlier that day, while Dennehy went to another friend called Robert Moore's house to sleep. When police searched Dennehy's shared residence on Easter weekend of 2013, none of the tenants were home. Police were looking for any clues that could help them solve the puzzling murder of landlord Kevin Lee. At the property in Orton Goldhay, police found a blood-stained mattress in the backyard. There was no attempt to hide the bloodied mattress. It was left in plain sight. Blood tests revealed that the blood, however, did not match Kevin Lee's. It was time to find the tenants of this quick-let property owned by murder victim Kevin Lee. Joanne Dennehy shared the Orton Goldhay bedsit with two men, retired Falkland War veteran John Chapman and 36-year-old burglar Leslie Layton. There was no sign of John, but police caught up with Leslie Layton and found a photograph of a dead John Chapman in his bed on Layton's phone. Leslie Layton had some explaining to do. He had quite the rap sheet already. Burglaries, criminal damage, driving offense, and car theft, all spanning over 20 years. Had he escalated his behavior to murder? Layton made a statement to police in which he told them what had happened to his flatmate, John Chapman. When Layton came out of the bathroom on the morning of March 29th, he bumped into Dennehy. She told him that she had stabbed John Chapman. When he saw John's bloodied body in his bed, he thought he would be next and feared for his own life. Still on a high after John's murder, Dennehy called up a friend and sang the Britney Spears song, "Oops, I Did It Again." When she saw the news report of Kevin's death on television, she danced a jig of delight. She reveled in her infamy. She had wanted to kill someone for such a long time, and she finally did it. By the 1st of April, Leslie Layton was in police custody, and all he could do was confirm that Dennehy was the one that had committed the murders and that they were currently in her car, a Vauxhall Astra, headed south. On Saturday night, March 30th, Dennehy and Stretch knocked on the door of Robert Moore, a friend of Stretch's. They were lying low in Peterborough, in plain sight. By the time police snuffed out Moore, the pair had already left, and Moore lied to police about their whereabouts. He also managed to reach out to them and tip them off about the impending murder investigation. Police appealed to the public for help in finding Dennehy and her accomplice, Stretch. From descriptions provided, Dennehy and Stretch would be easy to spot. Dennehy had a tattoo of a star on her face, and Stretch, with his unusual height, stood out in any crowd. A police officer in Norfolk informed investigators that he was called to a service station where a woman, fitting Dennehy's description, had shoplifted, and he was able to provide vehicle registration number as caught on CCTV. With this evidence, police could follow them as they were on the run with the help of motorway cameras. They saw the petty crimes of stealing food and drink as it unfolded, 2 steps ahead of them. When Dennehy and Stretch passed through Kington, they looked up an old prison acquaintance of Stretch's, a petty thief called Mark Lloyd. They were hoping he could help them sell some of their stolen goods. Dennehy had a knife with her and said that she had recently killed 2 men and that she felt like killing some more. Mark realized this was no joke, and his mind was working overtime to get himself out of this situation. But he wouldn't dare, as he could see Dennehy was highly agitated and serious about inflicting harm with her knife. In his observation, Dennehy had complete control over Gary Stretch. He did what she asked, but he still followed her instructions out of his own free will. She had never threatened Stretch, and he was a willing participant of his own accord. On their trip, the pair of them stole a camera and proceeded to taking sightseeing photos and many photos of themselves in ridiculous poses. There was one of Dennehy on the front balcony of an apartment building, her top lifted so as to expose her red bra. Her scarred stomach tells the history of years and years of self-harm. The next photo is of Gary Stretch in the same spot, mimicking her pose, shirt lifted, leg kicking up against the wall. It certainly does not look like 2 fugitives on the run after killing 3 men and disposing of their bodies. Dennehy wanted to make her way to Hereford, a 45-minute drive from Kington. She wanted to sell their stolen goods and forced Mark Lloyd to go with her and Stretch, holding him captive with the knife she had used to kill Kevin Lee. It was a long drive. Dennehy was drinking whiskey straight from the bottle while erratically telling Stretch to stop so that they could take some happy snap photos of their road trip. She made Mark drink half a bottle of whiskey and then commanded Stretch to stop at a service station so they could buy cigarettes. Their whole visit to the store is caught on CCTV camera. It appears as though Dennehy is hugging Mark, but in fact, that was just her brushing up closely behind him so he could feel the knife in her pocket. Mark remembers. Dennehy ran her hand down my back It was like being touched by a rattlesnake. Fortunately, the shop stop ends without incident, and they drive off. At this point, Dennehy is actively prowling, asking both Mark Lloyd and Gary Stretch to help her find her next victim. She made it clear that the victim had to be male, as she didn't want to kill women, especially women with children. Her aim was to kill 9 men in total, because that's how many people Bonnie and Clyde had killed before they were gunned down in 1934. If you'd like to be historically correct, Bonnie and Clyde's total tally of murders added up to 13. But no one would have argued facts with Dennehy at this point. She was on a mission to kill 9 people, chasing notoriety to become Britain's own Bonnie. Gary Stretch, or whoever was willing to come along, could be her Clyde. She was out of control, fueled by whiskey and adrenaline. Mark Lloyd remembers her saying to Stretch as they were driving into Hereford, "I want my fun. I need you to get my fun." Stretch pointed out a man walking his dog. Mark, at this point fearing for his life, witnessed Dennehy walking up to an innocent pedestrian, then attack him. The man was retired Hereford firefighter, 63-year-old Robin Beretta. Robin was very close to his home in broad daylight, in a safe area, a very public place when people took their kids to the park on West Falling Street. It was 3:40 p.m. when an alcohol-fueled Dennehy approached Robin from behind. At first he thought he was being punched in the back. He heard a female voice say, "I want to hurt you. I want to kill you." Then she stabbed his arm as he tried to fend her off. He kicked and punched her, but it made no difference. He was badly injured, left for dead as Dennehy casually returned to the green Vauxhall Astra, kissed Stretch on the cheek and said, "Thank you for that. Next man's got to have a dog. The next man's got to have a dog." She was ready for more. They proceeded to drive around Hereford when Dennehy spotted 56-year-old John Rogers walking his dog on a footpath between Golden Post and the Belmont estate. This was less than 10 minutes after her brutal attack on Robin Beretta. The car pulled up close to him and Dennehy jumped out. She casually walked up to him and said, "My boyfriend told me to do this." Then she launched her vicious attack with multiple stab wounds to his back and upper body as he was lying face down. Dennehy turned him over, ferociously stabbing him in his chest. "Oh, look, you're bleeding," she said. "I'd better do some more." John could see the blood pooling around his body and felt his life slipping away. He begged her to stop. Dennehy carried on, matter-of-factly, without showing much emotion. When she was finally done, she licked John's blood off the knife, grabbed his dog Archie, then jumped back into the car with the dog, ready for even more. John crawled away in a desperate attempt to find help. He was stabbed more than 30 times in total. He crawled the distance of 100 yards where a passerby came to his aid. Thanks to quick response by emergency services, both Robin and John survived the attacks and lived to tell the tale. These attacks were random and unprovoked, and law enforcement was on high alert to prevent any more. Robin was able to provide police with some information. Importantly, he had noticed the star tattoo on Dennehy's cheek. Police found Dennehy only 19 minutes after her attack on John Rogers, seated in her Vauxhall Astra outside a row of shops on Newton Close, in an area known as the Oval. Archie, John's dog, was unharmed and reunited with his owner. Dennehy was calm during her arrest and handed over her knife without a struggle, even going so far as to sing "Singin' in the Rain" as she was being apprehended. Stretch and Lloyd weren't with her at the time of the arrest. They had done a runner. But police caught up with the men and arrested them within the hour. When they cuffed Stretch, he said to officers, "I suppose I am Britain's most wanted." Joanne Dennehy arrived at the police station, joking and laughing. She showed absolutely no respect or remorse or realization of the situation she was in. Less than an hour after her vicious attack on John Rogers, she was flirtatiously commenting on an officer's distinctive eyebrows. She seemed to be enjoying the fact that all attention was on her. When she was told she was being booked for murder and attempted murder, she jokingly said, Could be worse. I could be big, fat, black, and ugly." To which an officer replied, "I'm not sure how that would be worse, though." Dennehy listened with amusement and maintained, "Yeah, it would." Police knew, had Dennehy not been caught, she would most definitely have struck again. She would not have stopped until she had reached her ideal number of 9 victims. And who knows if this bloodthirsty woman would have stopped even then. Her parents were informed about the situation, and for the first time in 10 years, they knew where their daughter was. But that is not the call any parent wants to receive. Her parents were devastated to hear what Joanne Dennehy had done. They could not understand how their kind, loving daughter could be so aloof and dismissive about her horrendous crimes. She clearly wanted notoriety. With Dennehy locked up, the public was safe again, but the full extent of her murderous rampage was about to unfold. 2 bodies were found by a farmer in ditches near Thorny Dyke, 10 miles from Peterborough, and a day after Dennehy's arrest on April 3rd. Police suspected one of the bodies would be the missing Navy veteran who shared Dennehy's quick-let flat, John Chapman. The second victim was Lukasz Slabozewski. At first, the deaths were classified as unexplained, but it did not take police long to link the murders to Joanne Dennehy and her henchmen. Lukasz was in the prime of his life, and his family was understandably shocked when they learned about his death. His sister Magda Skripczak issued a statement. "Lukasz was the joker in the family, always finding something to laugh about. His mom and dad are devastated by their loss, and he also leaves 2 grieving sisters." Retired naval officer John Chapman's death was equally upsetting to his loved ones. At the door of the bedsit where he lived and died, friends and neighbors paid tribute to him by lighting candles and spraying cider. On the boarded-up door, graffiti reads, "Rest in peace, John," and "Justice will be done." His family released a statement saying, "We are all so upset and shocked by the tragic loss of John. He was a loving brother, brother-in-law, and uncle. He was much loved by all who knew him and will be missed by all his friends and family." Kevin's family was broken after Dennehy unleashed a dark side to Kevin, leading him astray in the months leading up to his untimely death. They had to remember him for who he was before he had met her. Kevin was Christina's first and only love. He was a devoted father to his daughter Kiara and his son Dino. In their statement about losing Kevin, the family said, "We are devastated by Kevin's death. He was a wonderful husband, father, loving brother, and son. His naturally infectious personality touched everyone who knew him." It was time for retribution. Dennehy and her motley crew of co-conspirators were behind bars, and law enforcement were building an airtight case against them. With cell phone records showing communication between Dennehy, Stretch, Layton, and more on the night of Kevin and John Chapman's murders, circumstantial evidence was piling up. Police recovered blood splatter evidence from Kevin's quick-let apartment in Rolleston Garth. Traces of Lukasz Slabozewski's blood was found in the kitchen and all the way to the front door. The blood on a blood-stained sofa matched Kevin Lee's blood. Both victims' blood dripped on the carpet and showed that their bodies were moved. Attempts were made to clean up the scene with bleach, but it wasn't a very good job. Footwear impressions belonging to both Joanne Dennehy and Gary Stretch were also found at the scene. The blood-stained mattress found at the property in Orton Goldhay was John Chapman's mattress. He was killed in his bed as he was passed out in a drunken stupor. Clotted blood showed that he had been lying there for some time, probably the whole of Good Friday, while Dennehy was executing her second murder for the day, Kevin Lee. After his death, Dennehy took John Chapman's cell phone to stay in touch with Stretch, Layton, and more. When Stretch was arrested, there was blood on the shoes belonging to Lukasz Slabozewski. Shoes found at Stretch's home had blood matching Kevin Lee. In Dennehy's Vauxhall Astra, police found Kevin Lee's blood and the Easter card he had given Dennehy. Dennehy's knife was soaked with blood matching John Rogers, her last victim in Hereford. When she was on remand, awaiting her trial, Prison officials found evidence of a planned escape in her diary. The plan was to kill a guard and cut off their fingers to fool the biometric system in the prison. This plot earned her solitary confinement for several months. She claims isolation had a dire effect on her and caused her to self-harm, her human rights being violated. It was ruled that she was punished in accordance with the law, the nature of her offenses, and the risk she posed to the public if she were to escape. When Dennehy was indicted on the 18th of November at the Old Bailey in London, she was charged for the murders of Łukasz Slabozewski, John Chapman, and Kevin Lee, and the attempted murders of Robin Beretta and John Rogers. Dennehy shocked prosecutors and her own legal team and investigators by pleading guilty to all charges. Her legal team had the opportunity to double-check with her to confirm if she had indeed meant what she had said, and she said yes. She loved to kill and wasn't ashamed to admit it. Throughout court procedures, she showed no remorse and laughed. When asked what he would like to say to Dennehy, the survivor of her brutal onslaught, John Rogers simply asked, "Why? Why did you do it?" There is no logical answer to that question. Joanne Dennehy is undoubtedly a very disturbed person. Years of drug and alcohol abuse coupled with a sociopathic personality make a fatal combination. Her lust for violence and blood make her a very unique kind of female killer. Also, unlike most female serial killers who follow a dominant male, she was the dominant one. She didn't need any help in committing the crimes, only in cleaning up the crime scenes. Men like Gary Stretch, Leslie Layton, and Robert Moore were easy to manipulate, and she used them simply because she could. Dennehy chose to kill using a knife, a method that is both violent and messy. By using a knife, she received more satisfaction in the act of killing than, say, for instance, she would have had she poisoned her victims. In a police interview, she referred to murder as being Moorish, and that after the first killing, she got a taste for it. On February 28th, 2014, Joanne Dennehy was given a life sentence. She muttered and smirked as her sentence was passed down. She laughed when she heard that she would spend the rest of her life behind bars. Her mother feels that the world is safer with Joanne locked away for life because she has no remorse. She was given a whole life sentence, making her the third woman in British history to receive this custodial sentence, after Myra Hindley, known for the Moors murders in the 1960s, and Rose West. Incidentally, Dennehy was taken to the same facility where Rose West was incarcerated. West received her whole life sentence after bodies of several women were found at the Gloucester home she shared with her husband Fred. She was convicted of the murder of 10 women, mainly committed in the 1970s. Within 20 minutes of her arrival at Her Majesty's Prison Bronzefield, in an attempt to be the new alpha female, Joanne Dennehy threatened to kill Rose West. West was kept in solitary confinement for her own protection and subsequently moved to another prison, more than a 5-hour drive north from Dennehy's prison in Surrey. Stretch and Layton pleaded not guilty and claimed they were manipulated by Dennehy. Stretch was found guilty of 3 counts of preventing the lawful and decent burial of a body, and 2 further counts of the attempted murder of Robin Beretta and John Rogers. He was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 19 years to be served. Leslie Layton, Dennehy's former housemate, received a sentence of 14 years for disposing of the bodies in Peterborough and for perverting the course of justice. Robert Moore, where Dennehy and Stretch stayed while they were laying low, was found guilty of assisting an offender and received 3 years behind bars. No charges were brought against Mark Lloyd, who was in the car on the day of Dennehy's attacks in Herefordshire. He is still traumatized by the events he witnessed that day, but he feels fortunate to be alive. Trial judge Mr. Justice Spencer recommended Joanne Dennehy should never be released. He also said that she was sadomasochistic and lacked the normal range of human emotion. She proved the judge right, As she was led from the dock, she said to the courtroom, "I want you to know I am sorry for the attempted murders. I am not sorry for the murders." According to a fellow inmate at H&P Bronzefield in Surrey, Dennehy loved the fact that everyone knew who she was and what she had done. The inmate reportedly said, "She didn't like it when people said she killed 3. She liked to boast she had killed 5 and did not like it when people said she had failed." That explains Dennehy's comment about being sorry about the attempted murders. The sorry wasn't remorse, but rather regret that she didn't succeed in killing Robin Beretta and John Rogers too. The father of Dennehy's children, John Traynor, has remarried and lives in Derbyshire in the heart of England with his wife and the 2 daughters. Like Joanne Dennehy's surviving victims and the loved ones of those she killed, John and his daughters battle every day to forget the woman who had destroyed their family. If you'd like to read more about this case, have a look at the resources used for this episode in the show notes. You would enjoy the Crimes That Shook Britain's episode covering the Joanne Dennehy case. If you like our podcast, please share with your friends. Also, visit and like our Facebook page at facebook.com/Evidence Locker Podcast to see more about today's case. This was the Evidence Locker. Thank you for listening.